I have been behind the wheel of this rig for more years than I can count, and I have seen things on these highways that most folks would not believe if I told them I have felt the road shake under me when no other vehicle was around, and I have. Looked into my rearview mirror to see headlights that vanish the moment I blink, and I swear to you these roads hold secrets that no sane man would want to uncover, and I do not share these stories to scare you for the sake of a thrill, but because every word is real, and it might just keep you alive the next time you find yourself out here alone in the dead of night. One thing you need to understand is that highways are more than stretches of asphalt and painted lines. They are veins running through the land, and sometimes they carry more than just trucks and cars. They carry whispers, they carry shadows, they carry things that were never meant to walk among us. And I know this because I have been forced to drive alongside them more times than I care to remember. The first time it happened, I was rolling through a stretch of road outside Amarillo, Texas, a place I had driven 100 times before without issue. It was late, about 3 in the morning, and the sky had that heavy stillness that settles in when even the wind has grown tired. The CB radio was quiet, and the only sound inside my cab was the steady hum of the engine and the occasional creak of the trailer behind me. I had been driving long hours that week, and my eyes were fighting to stay sharp, so I told myself I would push through another 30 miles, then pull into the next truck stop for coffee. Now, let me tell you, I was not the kind of guy to get spooked easy. But something about that night felt off. The road was too quiet, like the world around me was holding its breath, and I began to notice something strange in the corner of my vision. It looked like a figure walking along the shoulder of the road. Now, you see that from time to time folks stranded, or hitchhikers. But the thing that froze me was how this figure moved. It did not sway the way a person does. It glided one smooth motion after another. No bobbing, no rhythm, just a steady, unnatural drift that kept perfect pace with my truck. I pressed harder on the gas, telling myself it had to be exhaustion playing tricks on me, but the figure kept up easily, and when I finally turned my head to look directly at it, I saw a face pale as chalk, with empty eyes that reflected no light. It grinned at me, and though my cab was sealed tight with the windows rolled up, I swear I could hear it laugh low and broken, like dry leaves being crushed under boots. I nearly lost control of the wheel, but I held steady, my hands locked in place as sweat stung my eyes. I drove faster and faster until the figure finally dissolved into the shadows behind me. I pulled off at the next truck stop, heart racing and hands shaking so bad I could hardly hold the cup of coffee I bought that night. I learned what every trucker who has been out here long enough knows: there are things on the highway that are not flesh and blood, and once they find you, they never really let go. I sat in that truck stop for a long time, trying to get my nerves back in order, and I kept telling myself maybe it was the fatigue, maybe I had started dreaming with my eyes open. But deep down, I knew it was not my imagination. I have spent too many nights alone on these highways to mistake real terror for a trick of the mind. And the thing is, once you see something like that, you start to notice other signs, little warnings that you might have missed before. Like how the air inside the cab suddenly feels colder, even though the heater is working fine, or how the road noise seems to vanish so that all you hear is the faint whisper of tires rolling on nothing at all. After that night outside Amarillo, I started paying attention, and sure enough, the more I paid attention, the more I realized that the highway itself was alive in ways most people never think about. I started noticing certain stretches where my headlights would not cut through the dark the way they should, as if the night itself was swallowing the light. I remember one run in particular, heading east through Oklahoma. The road was dead straight, no turns, no bends, but for nearly 10 miles it felt like I was driving through a tunnel of pitch black. My lights could not reach more than a few feet ahead, and the yellow lines seemed to fade under my wheels. I turned on the high beams, but it made no difference. It was like the darkness had weight, and it pressed in against the windshield, smothering me. I gripped the wheel so hard my knuckles ached, and the only thing that kept me moving was the sound of the engine, steady and true. I told myself, if the truck keeps moving, then so do I. And when the dark finally broke and the road opened back up, I pulled over and stepped out just to breathe real air. My legs were shaking so bad I could barely stand. I never saw anything in that darkness, not with my eyes anyway, but I felt it. Something rode along with me in that 10-mile stretch, and it wanted me to know I was not alone. Other truckers will tell you the same, though most of them do not like to talk about it. They say there are roads that do not belong to us anymore, that once the sun drops behind the horizon, there are things that come out of the fields and woods, and they walk the asphalt like it is theirs. One old-timer told me, never stop on the shoulder when the fog rolls in, because the fog carries more than mist. He said, you might see shapes moving in it. And once you acknowledge them, once you look too long, they notice you, and if they notice you, it is only a matter of time before they climb inside your cab. I laughed it off back then, but after what I have seen, I believe every word. After that night in Oklahoma, I started thinking, maybe I should get out of trucking altogether, but truth is, once you have lived this life long enough, it gets in your blood, and no matter how many times the road tries to spit you out, you always end up coming back. I told myself I would just keep my head down and do the miles, like I always did. But when the road decides it wants your attention, it does not matter how careful you are. You will see what it wants you to see. One of the worst hauls I ever had was a run from Nevada to Kansas, hauling construction equipment. It was supposed to be a straight shot, nothing special, but the night I left Nevada, I got a late start. I had planned on rolling by noon, but the load was delayed, and by the time I pulled onto the interstate, it was close to sunset. I was dead tired, but figured I would knock out a few 100 miles before shutting down for the night. About an hour into the drive, I started noticing a pair of headlights behind me, steady and low, like a car keeping distance. That is not unusual. Of course, plenty of folks end up behind you on the interstate. But what was strange was how the headlights stayed the exact same distance, no matter how much I sped up or slowed down. I tried switching lanes a few times, but the lights never passed me, never fell back, just held that perfect distance. It was unnerving. After 20 miles of this, I thought maybe it was another trucker messing with me, or maybe even a trooper, waiting for me to slip up. But when I really looked in the mirror, those headlights did not look right. They were too far apart, wider than any car or truck should be, and they had this faint green tint to them, like fog lights, but not quite right. Turned off onto a smaller highway, hoping to shake them. But the lights followed me, and when I slowed down to take a curve, they did not bend with the road. They floated straight across the field beside me, like whatever was casting them was not on the pavement at all. My skin crawled, and I pressed hard on the accelerator, pushing that rig faster than I should have. But the lights kept pace. I swear they moved closer and closer until they filled the mirrors so bright I could not even see the trailer behind me. Then, just as sudden as they appeared, they were gone, like someone killed the switch, and I was left alone on the dark road. I finally pulled over at a gas station outside a small town, and the attendant must have seen how pale I was because he asked if I was all right. I told him about the lights, and he just shook his head and said, "You drove past the floodplains, didn't you?" I nodded, and he said, "You ain't. The first those lights have been chasing trucks out there since my granddad's time." Now you would think, after something like that, I would quit, but I kept driving because that is what I do. The more I drove, the more I realized these things were not accidents or coincidences. There are stretches of highway that carry curses as heavy as the loads in my trailer. I have heard truckers tell stories about phantom hitchhikers who disappear when you stop to pick them up, or women in white dresses waving on the roadside only to vanish into thin air. I never used to believe them until I started stacking up my own experiences, like the time I was rolling through Arkansas, middle of summer heat, so thick it felt like you were breathing soup. I had the windows down, letting air in, and the night was quiet, except for the engine then. Out of nowhere, I smelled smoke, not diesel or rubber, but wood smoke like a campfire. I thought maybe a brush fire nearby, but when I looked around, all I saw were empty fields. Then I noticed shapes in the smoke figures walking along the highway shoulders. Like people made of ash and cinders, they moved slow, dragging their feet like they had been walking forever. I tried to ignore them, but one turned its head toward me, and I swear I saw hollow sockets where eyes should be. I cranked the window shut and gunned the truck forward, but the smell of smoke followed me for miles. It stuck in my clothes and hair, even after I showered days later. Another time I was deep in West Virginia, mountains twisting roads sharp enough to cut steel. It was pitch dark. No moon, just the dim glow of my dash lights. I came around a bend, and my headlights caught something standing in the middle of the road. At first I thought it was a deer, but as I got closer I realized it was a man, or what looked like one, tall and thin, with long arms hanging too low, almost down to its knees. It did not move. As I barreled closer, I leaned on the horn, but it just stood. There, staring, I swerved hard enough to make the trailer groan. But in that flash before I passed, I saw its face stretched smooth, like someone had pulled skin tight over a skull. No mouth, no nose, just empty pale flesh. I checked the mirrors, but nothing was behind me. The road was empty for miles. I did not stop. I could not. See, out here on the highway, you learn quick that not every danger comes from drunks or blown tires. Some dangers wear human faces or almost human faces, and they are waiting in the places where the road runs cold. The part that gets me is how real they feel, how solid the air gets around them, like you could almost reach out and touch. But you know better than to try. I tell these stories, not because I want to scare anyone, though I know they will, but because this is the truth of the highway, and if you ever find yourself out there alone in the dark, you better keep your eyes sharp and your hands steady, because the road is full of things that want you off it, or worse, one. Last story for this part, because it still keeps me awake. Even after all these years, I was headed south through New Mexico. Wide open desert, nothing but stars above me. I love those stretches. Usually because the sky looks endless and the road feels free, but that night I saw something that turned that freedom into a cage. I noticed lights ahead, on the shoulder, like a car with its hazards on, so I slowed to see if someone needed help. Truckers look out for each other and for travelers too. But when I pulled up, I saw no car, no truck, no vehicle at all, just two hazard lights floating chest high above the ground, blinking in rhythm like a warning. I thought maybe it was construction equipment. So I stopped a good 50 feet back. I stepped out, flashlight in hand. But as soon as my boots hit the gravel, the lights blinked faster, almost frantic, and then they split apart, moving away from each other across the desert floor, like eyes widening in the dark. I backed up fast, scrambled into the cab, and hit the gas hard. The lights chased me for a few hundred yards before vanishing, but I could still feel them behind me all the way to the next town. These things I am telling you, they are not just stories. They are warnings. The road is alive, and it does not forget once it has shown itself to you. You carry it forever, and it will find you again, no matter how far you drive. I have seen too much to ever doubt that now, and that is why I share it. So maybe the next driver who finds themselves in the dead of night, with only the hum of tires to keep them company, will know what to do when the shadows on the road start looking back at them. Now there are nights when I can almost forget about all the strange things I have seen, when the miles roll by easy, and the road hums beneath me steady like a lullaby. But then there are other nights when it feels like the darkness is waiting just beyond the reach of my headlights, waiting for me to let my guard down, and that is when it shows itself again. One of those nights came not too long after the hazard light chase in New Mexico, and I still cannot drive through that state without feeling a knot in my gut. I had a run going north, hauling refrigerated goods bound for Colorado. I figured it would be routine. I set out before sunset to get a good stretch done before the night hours, and for the first couple 100 miles, everything was fine. Then the sun went down and the desert turned black as ink, and the stars came out sharp as broken glass in the sky. I was rolling through a particularly lonely stretch when I saw something up ahead. At first, I thought it was another truck, pulled over, but as I got closer, I realized it was an old, rusted-out pickup sitting on the shoulder. Like it had been abandoned for decades. The paint was peeling, and the bed was caved in, like something heavy had dropped on it. The headlights were still glowing faint yellow, like old lanterns, but there was no engine noise, no exhaust, nothing living about it. I slowed down almost to a crawl, thinking maybe someone was inside needing help. But when my beams cut across the cab, I saw it was empty. Seats torn, stuffing spilling out like straw. But here is the part that made my skin crawl. The steering wheel was still moving, turning slow back and forth like invisible hands were guiding it. I floored the gas and did not look back until the pickup was just a speck in my mirrors. That night I stopped at a dusty roadside diner, one of those places with more flies than customers. I sat there nursing a cup of coffee, hands still shaking, and one of the other drivers sitting a few stools down must have noticed. He asked me what had me rattled, so I told him about the old pickup. He just nodded real slow and said, "You found the widow's ride." I asked him what he meant, and he told me about a woman whose husband died out there in a wreck decades back. She had been following him in her old truck when it happened, and some folks say she drove herself off the same stretch a night later. And ever since then, drivers have seen that beat-up pickup drifting the highway, looking for the one she lost. He said if you ever see it again, never stop, never look inside, because sometimes the passenger seat will not be empty. I laughed it off at the time, though, not very convincingly, but deep down I knew he was telling the truth. You see, that is the thing. About this job, truckers talk. We trade stories at diners and truck stops and rest areas. Most folks on the outside think it is just a way to pass the time, but we know better. We are passing along survival guides, warnings written in whispers, and cigarette smoke. I once met a man at a rest stop in Kentucky who told me about a road he called the Devil's Detour. He swore up and down that it looked like any normal back road branching off the main highway, but if you took it, you would never find your way back the road, just kept winding deeper and deeper into the hills until eventually the trees closed in and the sky disappeared overhead. He said he had a friend who drove that road once, and when he finally came back out days later, his hair had turned white, and he would not speak a word about what he saw in there, except to say the trees had eyes. I wanted to believe he was just telling tales. But after all the things I had seen myself, I kept that road burned into memory, and I never once took a turn without thinking twice. Another night that still haunts me, I was rolling through the Midwest, endless cornfields on both sides, tall enough to hide anything you could imagine. I had been driving since dusk, and fatigue was setting in, the kind where your eyelids feel like lead weights. But I forced myself to keep alert, because I knew those stretches were bad for deer crossings. About midnight, I started noticing movement in the corn, the stalks swaying like something. A big was moving just out of sight at first. I thought maybe wind, but the air was dead still. The higher stalks kept parting in long rows, following the truck like something was pacing me. I pressed the accelerator, trying to lose whatever it was, but it stayed with me for miles. Then, without warning, something burst out of the corn into the road. It was not a deer, not a man, not any animal. I recognized it was tall, hunched over its arms, too long, its face hidden in the shadows. But the eyes caught, my headlights glowing yellow like coals. I swerved hard, nearly jackknifed the rig, and by the time I straightened out, the road behind me was empty, no sign of it at all, but I could still hear its scream ringing in my ears, high and shrill, like metal. Tearing. I did not sleep much that night at the truck stop. Every rustle outside made my skin prickle, and I half expected to see those glowing eyes staring through my windshield as I lay in the sleeper. I told a fellow driver about it the next morning, and he just looked down into his coffee and said, "Yeah, the corn devil gets bold this time of year," like it was the most normal thing in the world. He did not laugh, did not joke, just said it plain, and I knew right then this was not just my imagination, but maybe the worst thing I have ever gone through happened in Arizona, on a night when the road itself seemed to vanish. I was running late, hauling a double load, and I pushed into the night longer than I should have. The desert was quiet, the stars thick overhead, but suddenly the pavement beneath me turned from asphalt to dirt. I thought maybe I missed a detour sign, but when I looked around, nothing made sense. The road stretched out behind me in a straight line, but ahead it twisted and branched. Like veins in stone, I slowed down, confused, trying to get my bearings, when I realized the landscape itself had changed. There were no cacti, no brush, just jagged rocks and shadows that did not move. Right? I knew then I was not on any map anymore. I drove for what felt like hours, every turn, leading deeper into a place that did not belong in this world. And the worst part was the silence. No engine noise, no tires, just silence so heavy it pressed against my skull. I started shouting just to hear sound again. And when I did, the echoes that came back were not my own. I thought I might die out there, swallowed by whatever place had claimed me. But just when I was about to give up, I saw headlights in the distance, a line of them, like a convoy of trucks. I drove toward them desperate, and as I got closer, the road beneath me turned smooth again, asphalt steady and familiar. The landscape shifted back to desert, and the stars looked like themselves. Once more, I pulled into the next station, shaking so bad I could not stand without leaning on the pump, and the clerk inside asked if I had seen the ghost road. I did not even answer. I just left my load and checked into the nearest motel. I could not face another mile that night. There are plenty more I could tell you, and each one is burned into me like scars on skin. The highways hold things older than any of us, and every mile carries the chance you will stumble across them. I do not know if they are spirits or demons or something else entirely, but I do know they are real. I have felt their eyes on me, I have heard their laughter in my cab, and I have seen their shapes in my mirrors, so I keep talking. I keep telling these stories because maybe, just maybe, it will keep you alive. When you are out there driving alone in the dead dark, with nothing but the road ahead, and the hum of the engine beneath you, because the moment you forget that the highway is alive, is the moment it reminds you. I think the scariest part about all this is how quickly the road can shift from ordinary to something that feels like you are driving straight into another world. 1 minute, it is just asphalt and paint. The next, it feels like the earth has peeled back its skin and shown you something underneath that you were never meant to see. There was one haul I took through Louisiana where this became clear in a way that still makes me shiver. I was hauling lumber to a yard outside Baton Rouge, and the route took me through long stretches of swamp country, narrow roads, with dark water on either side, Spanish moss hanging down from the trees like curtains. It was beautiful in the daytime, but when the sun dipped and the air grew thick with mist, it turned into something else entirely. I had the windows cracked for some air, and the swamp smell rolled in heavy like rot, mixed with stagnant water. I told myself to keep focused on the road because fatigue was setting in, but then I started noticing shadows moving in the fog alongside the truck shapes that looked like people, but too thin, too tall. They kept pace with me, their steps soundless on the wet ground. I told myself it had to be the way my headlights cut through the fog, but when I slowed to take a sharp curve, One of the figures glided right up to the shoulder, and I caught it clear as day. Its head was wrapped in dripping moss, and its hands were long, bony claws, dragging through the mud. I slammed the accelerator and did not slow until the swamp gave way to clearer ground. I pulled into a gas station around midnight, still rattled, and one of the old boys working behind the counter saw my face. He asked if I had driven through the mist. I said, "Yeah," and he just nodded like he had heard it all before. He told me those were swamp mourners, old spirits that wander the bogs, and that if one ever touches your truck, it means you will never make it to your destination. Clean. I wanted to laugh it off, but when I went back out to my rig, there were streaks of wet mud smeared along the trailer sides, even though I had never come close to the shoulder. After that, I became more careful about the roads I chose. But sometimes you do not get a choice. Dispatch tells you where to go, and you either take it or lose the run. And losing too many runs means losing your livelihood. One night in Missouri, I took a load that dragged me down a forgotten 2-lane highway, cutting through farmland. It was around 2 in the morning. The fields around me, wide and empty under a low moon. I had the radio low, just enough to keep me alert, when I noticed a flicker of light way down the road, like someone waving a lantern. I slowed, cautious, thinking maybe it was a broken-down farmer. But as I got closer, I realized it was a child, no more than 8 years old, standing in the middle of the asphalt, holding what looked like a candle. I braked, hard tires squealing, the load groaning behind me, and when I finally came to a stop, the figure was gone, not a trace left on the road. I sat there, heart pounding, telling myself I imagined it, but then the cab filled with the smell of hot wax and smoke. I did not wait around to see what came next. I rolled on fast and prayed I would not see the candle again later at a truck stop. Another driver asked me why I looked so spooked. I told him what I saw, and he said I had run into the candle boy, a spirit drivers had been seeing for years. He said, anyone who stops for him never makes it to their next stop alive. Some vanish completely, others are found in their rigs, burned out from the inside. I did not ask for more details. I did not want them. But not everything on the highway comes in shapes or smells. Sometimes it is sound that it follows you. Once I was running through the Rockies, icy winds howling around the cab chains, rattling on the tires, the radio dead with nothing but static for hours. Then, out of the blue, I heard a voice, soft and low, whispering my name. I snapped. My head around the cab was empty. I turned off the radio, thinking maybe interference, but the whisper came again, louder this time, right beside my ear. I gripped the wheel tighter than I ever had in my life and shouted into the empty cab, "Leave me alone." The whisper stopped, but the laughter that followed filled the cab with ice. It was not human laughter. It was hollow and sharp, like broken glass rattling in a tin can. I drove the next 100 miles, shaking so bad I thought I might lose control. But the whisper never came back. Not that night anyway. These roads take from you piece by piece. Every strange thing you see or hear, it carves something out of you and leaves a hollow in its place. But still, we drive because that is what we do. Remember one winter night in Montana, snow piling up faster than the plows could clear it. I should have pulled off earlier, but the load was hot, and I pushed on. Visibility dropped to near nothing, my high beams reflecting off the white wall of snow. Then out of the swirling blizzard, I saw a shape walking down the center of the lane, a man in heavy winter clothes, head bowed against the storm. I slowed, thinking maybe he was stranded. But when I pulled up beside him, the figure lifted its head. And there was no face, just a blank sheet of white where features should be. I slammed on the horn and swerved, but the figure never flinched, just kept walking through the snow like the truck did not exist. When I checked the mirrors, he had vanished, and the only tracks in the snow were my own. I told myself then and there that I would start turning down night runs, but of course I did not. The money is in long hauls, and the long hauls mean nights, and the nights mean the road will keep showing me things I do not want to see still. I cannot stop talking about them because silence feels worse. Silence feels like letting them win. I know plenty of drivers who went quiet after seeing something out here. They keep their eyes down their mouths. Shut! But you can see it in their faces, how the road marked them and never let them go. The truth is, there are too many stories to count. Too many miles soaked in things not meant for us to understand. I remember once in Texas, stopping at a lonely rest area, only one other truck there. Old Peterbilt parked under a flickering light. I went inside to grab coffee, but when I came back out, the Peterbilt was gone. I figured the driver had left, but when I checked the logbook inside the rest stop, his name was still signed in, and the clerk swore no one had walked past him. I left fast, and for hours afterward I kept seeing that same Peterbilt in my mirrors, a few truck lengths back, its light steady, but whenever I slowed it would vanish. When I sped up, it would reappear always behind me until the dawn broke and the daylight burned it away. You start to wonder after a while, maybe these highways are not just roads, maybe they are thresholds, and every night we drive them, we risk crossing into some place we cannot come back from. I think about that a lot, especially when the road is too quiet, when the sky presses down heavy and the tires hum, feels like the only heartbeat left in the world. I tell myself to keep driving, to keep my eyes sharp, because if I falter even once, if I let myself drift, I might find myself swallowed by the very road I have lived on all these years. And if that happens, no one will ever know where I went. Just another trucker vanished into the endless blacktop. There is one night that still makes me grip the wheel tighter every time I think about it, and I swear, if I live to be 100, it will still be burned in my mind, clear as the headlights shining on a wet road. It was a run that took me across Kansas flatland that stretches so far it makes you feel small, like the sky could swallow you whole. I had left Denver late and figured I would cross into Kansas by midnight, then find a place to bed down until morning, but the weather turned, and the plains have a way of changing on you fast. A storm rolled in black clouds, swallowing the moon and lightning ripping across the horizon. I thought about pulling over, but the rain hit before I could, and soon the road was flooding under my tires. I slowed down to keep control, but even at 30 miles an hour, the truck was sliding in the sheets of water. As I crawled along, I noticed a faint glow on the side of the highway ahead. At first, I thought it was another vehicle, maybe a wreck with hazards on, but when I drew closer I saw it was not lights from a car, it was a fire, a small controlled flame burning in a circle on the grass. The rain was pounding, but the fire never went out. It just burned steady, and inside the circle of flames was a man kneeling, his head bowed. I honked the horn, thinking maybe he needed help, but he did not move. Not even a flinch. I passed quick, and when I looked back in the mirror, the fire was gone, the grass wet and black as if nothing had ever been. There I did not sleep easy that night when I finally parked up at a rest area. The next morning over coffee, I told another driver what I saw. He looked at me long and hard before saying, "You ran into the fire watcher. He has been seen for decades, always, kneeling in a ring of flames. They say he lost his family in a house fire, and he has been burning ever since, haunting travelers who cross his path. Some folks say if you stop for him, you never leave the highway again." I tried to brush it off, but the way the man said it, so calm, so certain, told me he believed it with every fiber of his being. But Kansas was not done with me, because a few runs later, I had another experience worse than that one. I was eastbound, hauling grain in the dead of night, and the road stretched straight as a blade. I had the radio on low static, mixed with faint country music, when suddenly every station went dead at once, silence pressing in heavy. I reached down to adjust the dial, and when I looked back up, there was someone sitting in the middle of the road, cross-legged like a child, waiting to be picked up. I slammed the brakes load, groaning behind me, and the rig skidded to a stop. But when I looked again, the road was empty, just wet asphalt shining. in my beams. My hands were trembling on the wheel, and my heart thudded so loud I could hear it in my ears. I eased back onto the gas, telling myself I was seeing things. But then the cab grew cold, so cold, my breath fogged the windshield, and from the sleeper behind me came the sound of someone breathing slow, steady in and out. I did not look back, I could not. I just kept driving, and after a few miles the cold faded and the breathing stopped. But when I finally parked, I checked the sleeper, just to prove to myself it was empty, and there on the pillow was a small handprint, burned into the fabric black and charred as if pressed there by fire. I threw the pillow out that night, but I never forgot what it meant. Something had ridden with me for those miles and left its mark behind. Now you might think, after enough nights like that, a man would quit, but trucking is not just a job, it is a way of life. Once the road has its hooks in you, it is hard to walk away from it. I kept telling myself maybe it was exhaustion, maybe it was coincidence, maybe it was tricks of the dark, but deep down I knew better. The road is alive, and it shows itself to those who ride it long enough, and sometimes I wonder if it picks us, if the ones who stick around for decades are chosen, not just stubborn. I cannot prove it, but I feel it every time I see something that makes no sense. And still, I keep driving. There was a night in Tennessee when I was hauling down I-40, the moon bright enough to light, the hills and the radio buzzing with chatter. I was wide awake, feeling good when I noticed headlights behind me. They came fast, brighter than anything I had seen before, like stadium lights. I thought it was another rig pushing hard, so I pulled into the slow lane to let them pass, but they never did. The lights just hung there, inches from my trailer, too close for safety. I cursed and tried to wave them off, but nothing worked. So I pushed the accelerator, climbing the hill faster than I should. But the lights clung to me then. Without warning, they rose straight up into the air and vanished into the night sky. Not a sound, not a shadow, just gone. I pulled into a rest stop, shaking worse than any drunk I've ever seen. I sat there gripping the wheel until my knuckles went white, because I knew those were not headlights from any earthly vehicle I had ever seen. When I told another driver about it, he said I had seen the Sky Riders, lights that come down from above chasing trucks along the interstate until they decide to lift away again. Nobody knows what they are, but everyone who has seen them swears they are not from this world. I do not talk much about aliens because people laugh, but after that night I stopped laughing at the idea myself. Sometimes the road shows you ghosts, sometimes monsters, sometimes things you cannot even put a name to, but the part that eats at me is how they always seem to know when you are alone. It is never when the road is full of cars, or when you are in daylight. It is always the dead hours of night, the times when it feels like the whole world is asleep and you are the last soul alive. I think that is when the road pulls back the curtain and lets you see what lurks behind it all. Remember one night in Oklahoma, rolling through a thunderstorm, lightning flashing so bright it lit up the fields for miles at a time, and in those brief bursts of light, I saw figures scattered across the plains, standing still, watching the road. Every time the sky lit up, they were there, dozens, maybe hundreds of them, and when the lightning faded, they were gone, hidden in the dark. But I knew they were still out there, waiting. The storm passed, and the night grew calm again. But I could not shake the feeling that the fields were full of eyes on me until the sun finally rose. Every trucker has stories. Some talk, some keep them bottled up. But we all have them, and the older you get, the heavier they weigh. I sometimes wonder how many rigs, parked on the side of the highway, empty with no driver ever found, are not because of accidents, but because the road finally claimed another one of us. I have thought about quitting many times, but the truth is, I would not know how to live without the hum of the tires beneath me and the endless line of asphalt stretching ahead. So I keep rolling and I keep talking, because maybe the stories will outlast me. Maybe they will keep someone else alive long enough to make it home when the highway decides to bare its teeth again. There was a stretch of road in Arizona that I swore I would never take again after what happened there. But the truth is, the job has a way of pulling you back onto routes you swore off forever. I was heading west, heavy load behind me, and the desert. Night stretched wide and empty stars above, like broken glass scattered across the black sky. I had been driving for hours with nothing but the sound of tires and the faint hum of the CB for company. When I noticed the desert looked wrong, it was. Flat land I knew well, but that night the horizon kept shifting like the earth itself was breathing. Sometimes the mountains looked close, sometimes they looked 100 miles away. I shook my head, thinking maybe I was more tired than I realized. But when I looked into the mirrors, I saw the load behind me swaying side to side. Like something was pushing it, I pulled over onto the shoulder to check the straps, walked back with my flashlight shining over the cargo, and everything was tight. Nothing out of place, but then I heard footsteps crunching gravel behind me, slow, heavy, like someone walking barefoot across the stones. I swung the light around, but there was no one there. The desert lay silent, open and still. As a graveyard, I turned back to the trailer, and the footsteps started again, this time closer, and when I spun with the beam, I caught something for just a second, a tall figure, too thin, two long arms dangling almost to its knees, pale skin that glowed faintly in the dark. The light caught its face, and I wish it had not, because there were no eyes, only deep hollows like burned-out sockets. I stumbled back, dropped the flashlight, and when I scrambled to grab it again, the thing was gone, the desert empty, as if it had never been there. I climbed back into the cab and locked the doors, my hands shaking so bad I could barely get the rig into gear. As I rolled back onto the blacktop, I glanced at the side mirror and nearly lost my breath because the figure was running alongside. The trailer keeping pace at 60 miles an hour, its arms flailing in slow motion, its head tilted as if it was staring at me with those empty sockets. I floored the gas engine, roaring louder than I ever pushed it before, and slowly the figure fell, back until the red glow of my tail lights swallowed it. But for the rest of that night, every shadow along the desert highway looked like it was about to step out and chase me again. When I finally reached a truck stop near Flagstaff, I parked among the other rigs and sat there gripping the wheel, too afraid to climb into the sleeper, too afraid to close my eyes. I watched the rows of trucks, the neon lights buzzing overhead, and for a moment I thought I was safe. But then I noticed one rig, a few rows over, shaking slightly, like something was moving inside it. Not the way a man shifts around, not the way a storm wind rocks the trailer. It was jerking violently as if something big and wrong was thrashing inside. I was about to get out and check if the driver needed help, but then the cab light inside that rig flicked on, and through the glass I saw the same pale figure crouched in the seat, staring straight ahead. The light blinked off, and the truck went still again. I did not wait. A round after that, I fired up my rig and drove another 2 hours before I dared to rest. That was not the only time the desert played tricks on me. Another night, rolling down I-10, I spotted a woman walking the shoulder, long black hair dragging the ground, a white dress soaked with dust. I slowed, thinking maybe she needed help, but as my headlights washed over her, she vanished like mist, and the radio crackled with a voice that was not human, low and broken, whispering words I could not understand. The sound of it cut through me sharper than a knife, and I turned the radio off, yanked the cord from the dash, but even then I swear I could still hear it whispering faint behind my ears, until dawn broke over the horizon. See, the desert has an emptiness. That is not really empty. It holds things, it buries them under sand and silence, but sometimes they climb back out and walk along the asphalt like they never left. And when you drive through night after night, you see enough to know some of them are looking for company, maybe even looking for a ride. I always keep my cab doors locked, because I know if one of them ever climbs in beside me, I will not be getting out again. But the desert is not the only place that has shown me horrors. I will never forget there was a run through Pennsylvania coal country one foggy night, and fog like that is not normal. It was thick, like milk, clinging to the windshield no matter how much the wipers slapped. I slowed way down headlights, barely cutting through it. And then the shapes appeared, figures walking out of the mist across the highway. They looked like miners still wearing helmets, lamps glowing faint yellow, but their bodies were bent broken like they had been crushed by rock, their faces grey with coal dust. I leaned on the horn, swerved to avoid them, but they never looked my way, just kept walking slow and steady right through the hood of my truck and vanished behind me like smoke. When I reached the next rest area, I mentioned it to an older driver sipping coffee, and he just nodded, said those were the miners from the Centralia fires, the ones buried alive when the ground caved in decades ago. He said, the fires still burn under the town, still eat the earth from beneath our feet, and sometimes at night the spirits of the lost miners walk the roads, looking for a way out. When he said it, he did not smile, did not blink, just sipped his coffee, like he was telling me the weather, and that is when I knew the story was real. Another time in Kentucky, I stopped at a tiny diner off the highway, middle of the night, neon sign buzzing open. I parked and went inside, thinking a hot coffee would keep me alive for the next leg. But the place was wrong from the moment I walked in. No sound, except the buzz of the sign, no clatter of dishes, no hum of conversation, just silence and rows of empty booths. A waitress stood behind the counter, smiling wide, two wide eyes locked on me. She poured coffee before I asked and said, "Welcome back, driver," like she had been waiting. I told her I had never been there before, but she shook her head, still smiling, said, "Oh, you have, you never left." I glanced around trying to see if anyone else was inside, but the booths were empty, though I swear I heard whispers low and steady rising from every corner. I took one sip of that coffee, and it was ice cold, thick, like it had been sitting for days. I set the mug down and backed out of that diner quick as I could when I turned to look through the window. Again, the place was dark inside. Empty sign turned off and no waitress in sight. I climbed back into the cab, heart pounding, because I knew I had stepped into a place that was not meant for the living. People think trucking is just long roads and heavy loads, but when you ride these highways night after night, the road starts peeling back layers, showing you what hides in the cracks. I have seen shadows that move without light. I have heard voices in my CB that call me by name, even when it is switched off. I have looked into the mirrors and seen faces sitting in the passenger seat. Faces that vanish when I blink, and every time I think I have seen the worst, the road shows me something new. There was a night rolling through Mississippi when the air felt thick like syrup, the kind of night where even the crickets seem to stop singing and the trees lean heavy over the highway like they are watching you. I had just fueled up at a lonely stop and was making good time, the road ahead empty for miles, when I saw headlights appear in the mirror. Way back at first, they looked like any car coming up from behind, but as the minutes went on, I noticed they never seemed to get closer, just hung back at the exact same distance. No matter how fast or slow I drove, I switched lanes, slowed down, sped up, even pulled to the shoulder, but the lights mirrored every move, perfect, like they were attached to me. Finally, after 20 minutes of this, my nerves raw, I decided to stop altogether. I pulled into a small clearing by the tree line, turned off my headlights and waited. The world went quiet, dark, pressing in thick, and when I looked back at the road, those headlights were gone, not fading out, not turning, just gone like they had been switched off. But when I climbed down from the cab to stretch my legs, I noticed something strange in the dirt behind the trailer. Fresh footprints, dozens of them circling the truck, barefoot prints, deep like someone had been pacing round and round in the mud. While I drove, I got back inside, slammed the lock shut, and rolled out of there faster than I should have. And even now, every time I see headlights in my mirror that hold steady too long, I feel that same sweat start to drip down my neck because I know sometimes what follows you out here is not another driver. Later that same year, I had a run through the Rockies Colorado passes high and sharp where the drop-offs make your stomach twist. The snow was falling, heavy chains on my tires, grinding steady when I spotted a figure walking along the ridge to my right, way up near the cliffs. No path, no road, just a lone man trudging through snow, waist deep, his head bent against the wind. I thought maybe he was lost, maybe some hiker gone too far, so I kept watching, but the higher I drove, the clearer I could see, and that was no man. His arms were long as tree limbs dragging behind him, leaving grooves in the snow. His head swung side to side like it was broken at the neck, and the snow never slowed him. Not once. He just moved smooth and steady, and as I rounded a curve, he lifted that head and looked straight at me. Even from hundreds of feet away, I could feel his gaze burn through the windshield, and I gripped the wheel harder than ever in my life. By the time I came out the other side of the pass, the ridge was empty, but I swear to you, he had followed my truck with those dead, swinging eyes until the mountains swallowed. Himmy stopped at a lodge that night just to put walls between me and the dark, and the old man working the counter told me something I did not want to hear. He said there is an old story about the mountain walker, a spirit that roams the ridges, feeding on travelers who go missing in the passes. He said, when the snow takes a man, it is usually the walker that finds him first. And once the walker looks at you, he never forgets. The old man told me to keep salt in my cab, keep it in a small bag tied to the mirror, or else one night I might see those long arms reaching down from the ridge again. Now some folks will laugh at that kind of thing, but truckers, we see too much out here to laugh for long. I keep a bag of salt hanging in my cab to this day. Maybe it is just superstition, but maybe it is the only reason I have not vanished into one of those mountain passes myself. Not all the horrors I have seen are out in the open. Sometimes they get close, too close. One night in Texas, I parked at a rest stop, middle of nowhere, wide flat land, all around, nothing but fields. I climbed into the sleeper dead tired, shut my eyes and drifted. But some hours later, I woke to a sound, soft tapping at the driver's side window. At first I thought maybe another trucker. But when I peeked out, the lot was empty. No rigs, no cars, no people, just my truck sitting alone under a weak lamp. The tapping came again, steady 3 knocks against the glass. I sat there, heart hammering, whispering to myself, it is the wind, it is the lamp, it is anything but real. Then a shadow slid across the window, a hand pressed flat against the glass, pale fingers, 2 long nails scraping a slow squeal across the surface. I lunged forward and hit the horn, blasting the night wide. Open, but nothing moved, nothing fled, just silence pressing back. When I finally got the courage to shine my flashlight out the window, there was nothing there, no footprints, no handprint, not even a smudge. But the glass was cold, colder than ice, as if something had been leaning there, breathing against it for hours. You learn to live with the fear out here, but it chips at you piece by piece. Every scare, every sight, every sound that does not belong, until you start wondering if you are still the same man you were when you first grabbed the wheel. And sometimes I think that is the scariest part. Not the ghosts, not the creatures, not the shadows, but the way the road slowly hollows you out until you are half asphalt yourself. I will tell you another one from Louisiana swamp country, a place I do not like to haul through if I can help it. The air heavy with mist, roads lined with trees that looked like claws reaching over the blacktop. I was hauling timber, late night swamp on both sides, when I noticed movement in the water to my left. Figures rising from the surface, mud dripping from their shoulders. They looked like drowned men, skin gray and bloated eyes, shining faint green in my headlights. They walked out of the swamp, slow and steady, right toward the highway. And though the cab was sealed tight, I swear I could smell them, wet rot and river muck, thick enough to make me gag. I pushed the rig harder, tires hissing on wet asphalt. But as I looked back in the mirrors, they kept following, dragging themselves out of the swamp one after another until it looked like an army spilling onto the road, and then just as sudden they were gone, water still dark and calm, like nothing had stirred it at all. At the next fuel stop, I asked the cashier if people ever drowned out there. He just nodded slow and said, "More than I could count. Folks lost in hurricanes, lost in floods, lost in accidents. He said the swamp keeps its dead, but sometimes they crawl back looking for a ride to higher ground." When he said it, he would not meet my eyes, and I knew he was not joking. The longer you drive these highways, the more you realize the map does not show everything. The dotted lines and mile markers, they only tell part of the story. The rest is hidden in the night, waiting for you to pass by. And every time I climb into this rig, I wonder what part of the map is going to come alive next. There was a stretch in Nevada I will never forget. Wide desert highway, no towns for hours, just me, the hum of the rig and stars sharp enough to cut the sky. It was 2 in the morning when I saw what looked like a motel sign flickering in the distance. A neon vacancy light glowing red against the black. I knew that road. I had run it a dozen times. And there was no motel out there, just dirt scrub and old mining ruins. But that night the sign was there, clear as day. I slowed down, thinking maybe a new place had opened up. Maybe I was losing my bearings. I rolled closer, and sure enough, there was a motel sitting just off the shoulder. Old 1960s style 2 stories with the paint-peeling doors lined up with faded numbers. The lot had only one car. In parked a rusty sedan with all 4 tires flat. Something about the whole thing made my skin crawl, but I was tired and thought maybe a cup of coffee would do me good. I pulled the rig to the side and walked toward the office, the neon buzzing overhead. Inside, a bell sat on the counter, and when I rang it, a woman stepped out from the back smiling wide. She wore a faded uniform, her hair pinned up like she had stepped out of another time. She asked if I needed a room. I told her no, just coffee. She nodded, still smiling, said help yourself in the lounge. When I walked in, there were people sitting in the booths, but they all sat perfectly still, heads bowed, not moving. I thought maybe they were asleep, but the air was too heavy too. Still, I poured. A cup took 1 sip, and it was cold like ice water thick with dust. I set the cup down and turned to leave. And that is when I realized the people in the booths were not breathing. Their faces, pale grey eyes open wide, staring at nothing. I ran back. Through the lobby, heart slamming, but the woman was gone. Counter-empty door swinging wide on its hinges. When I looked back at the highway, the motel was gone too. Just black desert stretching for miles. No sign, no lights, no building. I climbed back into the cab and drove till sunrise, telling myself I would never stop again for anything that looked too easy. That was not the first time I stumbled into something that should not exist. One winter night in Illinois, I got caught in a blizzard snow. Whipping sideways, cutting visibility to almost nothing. I kept crawling forward, praying to find a place to pull off. And finally, I saw lights ahead, warm yellow lights shining through the whiteout. I pulled up, and there stood a roadside diner, smoke curling from the chimney windows, glowing. I parked and went inside, relieved to find warmth, but the place was silent. No waitress, no cook, no other drivers, just plates of food, sitting half-eaten on every table, steam still rising like folks had just stepped out a moment before I called out, but no one answered. I picked up a fork from one of the plates, and it was warm, like someone had just been eating. I dropped it fast and backed out through the door, but when I turned to look again, the diner was nothing but a boarded-up shack, snow piled high against the windows. No lights, no smoke, no warmth, just a ruin, standing empty in the storm. I drove away, cold sinking deeper into my bones than the snow ever could, because I knew I had stepped into a ghost of something long dead. It gets so a man starts doubting his own mind out here. I have seen whole towns appear along the interstate. Neon signs, gas stations, diners, even people moving about only for them to vanish as soon as I take the exit. Like the world itself is playing tricks. But the scariest part is, sometimes I wonder if I would even know if I drove into one of those places and never came back. Would anyone notice, or would I just be another ghost town resident waiting for the next driver to stumble in? There was a night in Georgia that still rattles me. I was hauling through back roads to save time, twisting two-lane highway lined with pine trees, thick and dark. I noticed the smell, first sharp, sweet like rot, mixed with something metallic. Then the fog rolled in thick, curling around the tires and headlights. The road narrowed, and up ahead I saw a figure standing in the middle of the lane. A little girl, maybe 8 years old, wearing a torn dress. She lifted her hand, like she was waving me down. I slammed the brakes, trailer groaning to a halt. She looked up and I saw her eyes, glowing faint green in the beam of my lights, and then she opened her mouth wider than any child should, wider than any person could, and the sound that came out was not human. A shriek high and sharp that rattled the windows. I threw the truck in reverse, heart hammering, and as I backed away, the girl dropped onto all fours, her body bending backward, bones cracking as she scuttled toward me faster than I thought possible. I floored it, spinning wheels until I was clear of the fog. When it finally lifted, the road was empty again, just asphalt stretching between the trees. But I will never forget the sound of her scream. It still rings in my ears when I try to sleep. Some nights I wonder if the road is not haunted by ghosts, but by memories twisted and alive, like the pavement itself, remembers every accident, every soul lost along the way, and bleeds them back out into the world. I have seen wrecks that replay themselves over and over, a truck overturned on its side, flames licking the cab, people screaming for help, but when I pull over to lend a hand, the fire vanishes, the screams fade, and the road lies empty again, like nothing ever happened. I have seen a sedan crumpled against a guardrail, blood on the glass, a woman pounding on the inside window for anyone to help. But when I blink, it is gone, and I am left gripping the wheel, wondering if I just looked into the past, or maybe into the future. There was one night, though, that made me question more than anything else, and it happened out on Route 66. I was dead tired, pulled over on an abandoned stretch, and climbed into the sleeper for a nap. I must have dozed hard, because when I woke, the truck was not on the highway anymore. It was parked in the middle of a dusty main street in a town I had never seen before. Buildings boarded up, windows broken. No people, no sound. I climbed out, looking around. Confused, the air heavy and still. Then I heard music, faint at first, like an old jukebox, playing down the street. I followed it to a bar. The door swinging open. Inside it was packed, men and women laughing, dancing, the jukebox, glowing blue light. But none of them looked at me. I shouted, waved, tried to push through, but my hand went right through them like smoke. Then all at once, the jukebox clicked off. The laughter stopped, and every head in that room turned toward me, their faces melting eyes, black holes, mouths stretching wide. I ran out of there faster than I ever moved in my life, climbed back in the cab, and slammed the ignition. The engine roared, and just like that, I was back on Route 66, alone, night sky, above no town, no bar, no people. I do not know if I dreamed it or if I slipped sideways into something else, but I never pulled over on that stretch again. After all these years, I have started to think the road is not just a line of pavement, it is a doorway. Sometimes it opens and shows you things you are not meant to see. Sometimes it swallows people whole and leaves nothing behind, except a story told over coffee at the next stop. Maybe that is why I keep talking. Maybe that is why I keep driving. Because if I stop, if I quit, maybe the road will finally decide it is my turn to disappear and join whatever waits out there in the dark.